the adoption of Kit Malthouse as co-chair to the APPG. I'm grateful that you have been willing to come back to the role that we started before.
Yes.
And could I have agreement from MPs and peers in the room to adopting Kit Malthouse as co-chair of the all-party group? Second by Molly Meacher, thank you so much. And we've got a full record of peers in the room.
Yes.
Thank you. Kit, I very much look forward to working with you again and making progress with our parliamentary colleagues on this in this Parliament and the next. And I know you've got to go because you've got to make statements. So I know that's sorry to lose you, but you're still with us and then to go. But very much look forward to working with you and thank you very much for going forward. We have a really busy afternoon. Great people for squeezing in. Keep coming. Well done to the team for getting people online. You're very welcome and in the room. We've got speakers coming forward, and I'm going to keep people pretty much to time because we do have a very busy session, and I'm particularly delighted to welcome in the room Dr. Catherine Forrest to talk to us. And Catherine, I just at this point I'll meet with us again here and be here is a great privilege, and thank you for your time. Moving swiftly on up to Scotland, I think we're starting with Liam McCarthy. Liam, we're very interested in the work you're doing on the assisted dying for terminally ill adults in the Scotland bill. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you this afternoon.
Thanks very much indeed, Catherine. It's a pleasure to be here. I think I've joined previously on virtually, but I hope one day to be able to attend the APPG in person. Can I also? Is the connection?
I'll have to go off video.
Off video. Do you want to try off video?
I'll try, but yeah. Is that any better? Is that coming through? Okay.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, right. Probably on the basis that I'm sporting a moustache from November, it's probably as well that my camera is switched off. But look, I'll give you a brief update on where things are at in Scotland, and happy to take any questions thereafter if that is helpful. We've just moved into the phase of drafting a bill. The consultation that concluded at the end of last year had a record number of responses, around 14,000, which took a number of months to process, to validate and to process. But I'm pleased to say the overwhelming support that a change in the law received, sort of 76% outright support, 78% if you include those that were broadly supportive. So I think a restatement of where the polls have been suggesting the public has been for some time. We then had a period of a month where I had to garner support from MSPs across the parties. The threshold is 18 MSPs. That was achieved, I think, in the space of an hour or an hour and a half. We concluded with 36 MSPs supporting. We could have, I think, comfortably got a few more, but 36 seemed a good place to land, as that was the number of MSPs that supported the bill at stage one when the Parliament last considered the bill that Margaret MacDonald and subsequently Patrick Harvey brought forward. So strong cross-party support, and I think one of the most striking things about the consultation was the extent to which people were sharing personal experience, either of family members who have lost someone to a bad death, or indeed those with a terminal illness, who were very keen to share their experience and make the case for change on the basis of that. I think that's going to inform the process this time around to a far greater extent than it did last time. I think the other things maybe to note, and I maybe said this last time I joined the APPG, is that the political mood appears to be catching up with where the public mood has been for some time. And again, I think personal experience goes a long way to explaining that shift in the political dynamic. And it's genuinely cross-party, as it always has been. I think another factor has been what we've seen internationally, and I'm delighted Catherine is able to join you in person. She spoke at an event in the Scottish Parliament last week, and I know for a fact has managed to bring over a couple of other MSPs from maybe wavering to strong support. But her experience, the experience in California, other states in the US, as well as what's happening in Australia, I think has had a great influence in providing a degree of reassurance to colleagues in the Scottish Parliament that this is a change in the law that can be achieved very successfully and very smoothly. I think I'm also, I need to make mention of the medical advisory group that we established sort of at the beginning of the year, that's pulled together experts across the various strands of the medical profession, and been chaired by my colleague Sandesh Gulhani, himself a practicing doctor, one of my Conservative MSP colleagues. And it's been, I think, invaluable in pulling together a report that's due to be published, I think, early next month, setting out some recommendations about how this will work in practice in a Scottish context, talking through the pathway and I say, making recommendations on some of the specifics. So I think given how the proposals I'm bringing forward sit within a wider national health and care service, I think that input from medical professionals across the piece is going to be worth its weight in gold. So where we go from here, as I say, we've begun the drafting process. I continue to have discussions with what's called the non-government bills unit within the Scottish Parliament that support members taking forward bills. I've been cautioned about putting any time frame on when we might be ready to introduce a bill, but I'm hopeful it will be early in 2023. NGBU always insist that I simply refer to in 2023. But the drafting process has started well, but I'm conscious, even though we're able to rest quite heavily on some of the international experience and on the expertise I've been able to draw on through the MAG, getting the detail right of that draft of the bill is going to be crucially important in keeping people on side and building confidence and momentum behind these proposals. I'm sure I've probably missed off things that I should have mentioned, but I know you're pressed for time, convener. So if there's anything anybody wishes to ask me now, I'm very happy to answer any questions.
We'll move to that questions at the end, actually.
Okay.
Liam, that's so. Thank you so much for your work and your concise, marvellous, and thank you for your time explaining the process of Scottish legislation to me as well, so to be able to keep up with it. It's fascinating work. So elsewhere in the United Kingdom family, we're moving to Jersey, and I'm really pleased to welcome Deputy Uzu to talk to us next, please.
He's having a bit of trouble.
Yeah, so if we go to Alex.
Okay, we're still remaining with in the United Kingdom family. So if I can welcome Dr. Alison to join us next. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me at your end?
Yes.
Excellent. My name's Alex Aronson. Just a little bit of an overview. The Isle of Man is a self-governing crown dependency. We're about 85,000 people. Tynwald is the oldest continuous parliament in the world, and we've got about 24 elected members. We do have a Labour Party, a Liberal Party, but most members are independent. And so that allows us, I suppose, to have more consensus politics, perhaps than party politics. In terms of assisted dying, there have been two previous attempts to try to get a private members bill through. First was in 2003, which led to a committee being set up, which produced a comprehensive report and then managed to kick the whole subject into the long grass. And then in 2015, who is now the Speaker of the House of Keys tried to get a private members bill, but was unsuccessful in that stage. Now, what we've seen in the elections of 2016 and 2021 is a real change in the makeup of our Parliament. Much more younger people, more progressive people, certainly a far more female membership there. And I think that has changed the dynamics of our Parliament to look at more progressive issues. And so in June this year, I was given leave to introduce a private member's bill, and the title was to enable adults who are terminally ill to be provided at the request with specified assistance to end their own life. And that sort of wording was very much modelled on the wording used by Baroness Meacher in terms of her bill going through the House of Lords. And we've already looked at some of the bills that have been prepared in the UK to see how we can modify them for the Isle of Man. Our legislation, once passed by the two chambers on the Isle of Man, then has to be approved by the Privy Council. And so it's important that our legislation resonates with perhaps some of the ambitions of Westminster and your own Parliament. So I was granted leave to introduce the bill in June by an overwhelming majority. Now we tend to be quite polite here, and so often give leave to introduce. That doesn't necessarily mean that I've got an overwhelming majority to get the bill through, but I'm fairly confident that we can do that. And so we'll be launching a public consultation within the next 2 weeks and running that over the winter period in terms of some of the specifics of assisted dying and what legislation would look like, as well as trying to explain to people the difference between assisted dying and some of the misconceptions that are abounded sometimes deliberately. When I brought a motion to the House of Keys back in 2020, there was quite concerted opposition even to the motion by various UK-based groups and certain religious groups on the Isle of Man against the ethos of assisted dying, and I'm quite prepared for that to happen again. But the idea would be to get legislation first reading early next year in the House of Keys, and then hopefully get it past second reading and clauses stage, so that we could advance this debate, advance the argument, and really provide the people of the Isle of Man with that real choice at the end of their lives. As with lots of other small jurisdictions, we would need to bring in some residency criteria, but certainly looking at some of the work that's been done in Westminster already on legislation, and some of the other work that's been done in the Commonwealth, particularly the New Zealand and Australian legislation, that's very feasible. And so I'm fairly confident that we can advance this at the beginning of next year, and hopefully that will align with some of the work that's been going on both in Scotland and in Jersey as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Fascinating work, and thank you for again being so succinct. That's really helpful. I think we're now moving outside the UK. Okay, Philip's back. Thank you for we could message each other, but the internet obviously doesn't work very well in here. So over to Jersey. Philip, over to you. Thank you for your forbearance.
And sorry for the technical. We've got some of the fastest fibre in the world, but just sometimes comms doesn't work. So apologies.
Yes.
I say I've been a parliamentarian. I retired after 19 years of service in the States Assembly in 2018. I've taken a 4-year break, and I was back in an election in a very new government. We're not a part of the system in Jersey. We're all pretty well independent, although there is one smaller party. In the period of time when I was outside of the Assembly, I had a very important personal story, and I wanted just to say that I commend the work that your APPG Secretariat has done in making the case for assisted dying in a very human way. The individual was my oldest friend, a guy called Alan Dushman, quite a well-respected optometrist. He rolled out all sorts of NHS things in the UK. He came back to Jersey to look after his sister, and within weeks he started getting headaches. Unfortunately, he had a terminal diagnosis of a brain tumour that coincided with COVID. He tried to get on lots of trials. And the thing that Alan had was an absolute determination to end the life that he knew was coming to an end at a time of his choosing. At the time, the only opportunity he had would be going to Dignitas in Switzerland, which, notwithstanding the fact that that would have been difficult anyway, was really difficult. I might have changed my mind on assisted dying because of that. Alan changed my mind. And if I may also say, the stories that he gave, the evidence he gave to our panel, the scrutiny panel that was in the last government, changed, I think, the terms of the debate. And I cannot explain or confirm in any more importance of making the stories real and human, which is what happens. We now have a new State Assembly. The Assembly did the last one as a result of, I think, Alan's testimony and the work that was done. They proved the principle of assisted dying. That has been approved by the Assembly, and so now our system is that you effectively have an in-principle agreement, and then you go to the law drafting process. That law drafting process has been the subject of a consultation, which I don't know whether the APPG has copies of the Jersey documentation. I would commend them to your reading if that's helpful. That consultation is now closed. And my reading of the State Assembly, we have a new health minister, lots of ministers actually, and there's almost cross-ministerial. I don't think there's one minister now in Jersey that isn't in favour of it. Maybe one on Christian grounds. But we also are testing the mood of our Assembly to see whether or not there is a support in the wider Assembly to actually bring the legislation into effect after what has been an extensive period of public consultation. We think there is wide public support. We were quite surprised that in the public consultation, there wasn't even an attempt to reopen the debate by those known vociferant opponents of it. We're very confident, therefore, that the legislation, which at the moment has a timetable which is quite extended because of the legal drafting of it, that's said to take a year. We're going to be trying to compress that as best. We've had effectively, and the number of principals that have agreed it's got to be residents. We're going slightly wider than some other jurisdictions. But if there is any process at all that we can assist, this isn't a competition, it's too important to that. But if we can advance legislation and get this into force in Jersey as one of the earliest of all the devolved and other Crown dependencies, we'll be pleased to do so. It's got, I detect, wide public support. There are some medics who wish to opt out. There is a movement for advancing palliative care. What actually happened to Alan is he died not by going to Dignitas, he died of natural causes. But if I could take back the time that he spent worrying, stressing, all the time of his illness, which was going to be terminal, if I could take that time and give it to him to live the life that he had left, I would do it. The amount of time that he obsessed with wanting to choose death at the time of his choosing because he was frightened. His story stands, I think, as evidence of why assisted dying is necessary. I think it's winning hearts and minds, and Jersey looks forward to being an exemplar jurisdiction. But there is obviously the technical detail of law drafting, and as a small jurisdiction, just like our friends in the Isle of Man, that sometimes can be time-consuming and problematic. I don't really want to say any more because I don't know how much you know about Jersey, but more than happy to ask any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Philip, and thank you for, Alan would be proud of the way that you have been able to articulate that case for him. And I think those stories are something that many of us do recognise, and people sharing their stories, we're very grateful to them. It makes it much more powerful. Finally, on the round and is going to France to hear about the French government's plans for legislation on choice at the end of life in the wider European context. Benjamin Matley. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much to let me present what is going on in France for the new legislation. Sorry in advance for my English, it's not very good, but I will explain what the French government wants to build with the citizen, because next month we will have a new assembly of citizens, 150 citizens randomly selected, which represents the French people. Will have a debate during 3 months about the end of life, and at the end of this process, it's a new process because the last time the government used this citizen assembly was for a debate about the climate 2 years ago. So it's a way to the French government to not take place in this debate and let the citizen decide it. And at the end of this 3 months of debate, the citizens will propose to the parliament new legislation, and the parliament will have to take this proposition and make law, new legislation. So we hope that in France in 2023 we will have a new legislation, but it depends what this citizen assembly will propose to the parliament. But we know that in France, 90% of the French people would like a new law about the end of life in order to have some things like we would like to have for the Association of France for Dignity in Dying. So we would like something like in Belgium. So we will see, but it's a new process, and we hopeful that it will succeed to have a real proposition. And the parliament in France too is majority in favor of a new law. So we hope that it will be a good process with no surprise, and will give us the opportunity to have a new law next year. But it will take a little time, but it begins the next week, yes, in 2 weeks exactly. And we will saw this new assembly because it's new citizens. It's not the same citizen for the climate. It's new citizens randomly selected. They will discuss about all the things about the end of life, and they will propose to the parliament a new legislation in order to have a real answer to the request of most of the French people.
Thank you. And I say to all our speakers, our end, occasionally we dipped in and out. I think that is Parliament's reception, but we'll make sure, I know the team, we've recorded that. So for colleagues in the room and our other colleagues, we've got a number of members of Parliament who have come into the room. We'll make sure that we've got all the details, but we absolutely got most of that. And thank you for speaking to us in English as well. Very grateful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that Kit has had to leave because he's got to go to the protocol means he's got to be in the beginning of the debate for this afternoon because he got moved from yesterday. So apologies for that. But if we move to Catherine, and we've been given some time for our speeches. And again, Catherine, really, you're very, very welcome. And we're very grateful to you for giving the personal and professional perspective this afternoon. And do take your time. This is more difficult. Thank you.
I'm using notes unusually for me, but it is a little difficult, but I'm very honored to be a part of the conversation here. And this is my second or third time in the context of speaking to jurisdictions in the UK. And I'm very grateful for the level of debate, the high level of debate, thinking about in what ways is it a challenge and of interest here. So I wish to speak to that. I'm a clinical associate professor of family and community medicine at the University of California, San Francisco's Natividad program in Salinas, and I'm the past chief of family medicine at Stanford University, family medicine. Last year, I was the California's medical director for Curatives Vaccine Project, 1 million vaccines in my name in my state. I'm a lifelong public health specialist, and my career is centered on health equity and primary care education. Since the California end-of-life option took effect over 5 years ago, I've prescribed medical aid in dying for numerous terminally ill Californians. My patients have mostly been over 70 years old with cancer, heart disease, or neurologic disease, and I've trained hundreds of physicians on best practices in medical aid in dying. I teach family medicine, but I also mentor physicians from any specialty who opt in and who want to be a prescriber. And the medications are familiar to all of us in medicine. What's new is the context of these crucial conversations at the end of life. And I believe that getting better at these conversations and talking about these options improves healthcare at the end of life for all of us. In the quarter century that medical aid in dying or assisted dying has been legal in the US, starting in the states of Oregon and Washington, we've seen it rarely used. In my state, 486 terminally ill people had an assisted death in California in 2021, accounting for 0.2% of all deaths in California that year. Never with coercion, Just as with every medical decision requiring evaluation of medical decision-making capacity, our law requires meeting privately with each physician and patient to assure the person is clear. And just recently, I met with an elderly woman in her home, physician to patient, so she could clarify her own wishes with me. Physicians are trained in our work to evaluate this throughout our careers. We've also seen gratitude, immense gratitude, both for those who do use the option and those who do not use the option. And this was evident in the case that was discussed in Jersey. Just the knowledge of the ability to have agency at the end of life has a ripple effect through the entire society around the culture of death and dying. A recent example of this was a man I prescribed for with advanced cancer. He had a tracheotomy in place. He had intractable pain. He'd been a tremendous leader in the AIDS community in San Francisco, and he felt that he was able to demonstrate a nonviolent and very compassionate death to a community that had been very traumatized by death and dying. And it had a ripple effect through the San Francisco community. And they did not have to see him continue to suffer. So I desire for people to really understand the ripple effect through a community when we change the very conversations about death and dying, when people have agency to make their own decisions at the end of their life. And right before that, I had a patient go through the process of options of counseling, who was terrifically relieved and found that each day was easier to face. Each and every day was easier to face. Ultimately, she lost the ability to use the option. But until that time, she was able to make crucial conversations with her family, and was able to enjoy the quality of her life. Again, spoken to in Jersey. We often say in California that the legislators and physician community are one difficult death away from giving over to understanding that the option should be available to anyone. They would want it for themselves and their beloveds. So they would want someone with good skills to be trained and to be legal for their loved ones. I have a deep abiding passion for the physician community in this capacity. Before it's legalized, it's illegal. I'm one of the people who changed my mind. And I changed my mind as I traveled through the medical world, through a changing society. As society changes, we change our minds. There was a time when I could not have been a physician in my own community, 150 years ago, and now I can be a professor of medicine at the top institutions in my state. There are people in this community that cannot be legislators and now can be legislators. Our society is changing and it's hard to change our minds, but we do. And I changed my mind on this topic. And I believe that we can do it by studying, watching, doing, teaching best practices. I sit on the American Clinicians Academy of Medical Aid and Dying with the purpose of being able to do this as best as anyone can. And I had my first case 25 years into my career. The generous physicians of Oregon helped me. Now I help others. It's normal to be wary in society until we learn we're concerned. And most of us cannot imagine these treatments. Some of the questions I've gotten since I've been here are elementary questions. How does it work? We have 1,000 cases in California that we've documented. We know how to do this well. And we know that it can be done without coercion. We know that we can do it with really evaluating capacity. After all, it's the only predictable experience that absolutely everyone in this room will have. And we often say that if we ask the right questions, people will know the right thing for themselves in the privacy of their room with their physician. Right now, I'm also here before you speaking as the spouse of someone who just last year used medical aid in dying to peacefully end his terminal suffering. In April of 2021, Will Forrest.
Take time, we've got time, we're ahead of time.
My beloved of 37 years was diagnosed with a lower motor neuron disease similar to ALS, now thought to be related to a COVID infection in 2020. However, it turned out to be much more swiftly degenerative and deadly than ALS. A month later, on our way home from a visit with this remarkable physician, And it was confirmed in May of 2021. He turned to me and he said, "Catherine, if you hadn't fought for the legal aid right to aid in dying to hasten my inevitable death from the suffering, I would be terrified for every remaining moment of my life. Thank you. If I were here in this jurisdiction, I would not have that experience." You see, because he was a brilliant scientist, a public health scientist, mind, toxicologist, epidemiologist. He served our state for 35 years. He was decorated by the state of California for his service. And he was told his body would deteriorate rapidly till he could barely function at all. And eventually he would lose all his ability to communicate, move, breathe, swallow, all while being completely aware. And he had a deep desire to live, but he knew he was going. He died by choking or asphyxiation, which for Will would have constituted unimaginable suffering. And instead, in his last several months, he was able to be fully present. In the time he had left was our family and friends, knowing that the option of aid in dying was available. And it went very quickly. There was no way we could ever have traveled. And when the time came, after an excruciating night when he began to choke and gasp, he knew that the balance had shifted. Before then, he didn't know what he was going to do, but he knew he had the option. And he asked me to gather our family together. And we wheeled his bed outside, right outside our home. And he ingested the compound, fell asleep. And surrounded by the forest and our family, he died peacefully. And that's my family's life experience of his death, not his unimaginable suffering. For Will, it was the right thing. I had done anything to have more days with him, by the way. Ultimately, I challenge anyone to tell me, his widow and a professor of medicine, that there was a better treatment for his suffering, that it would be less harm for him to have lived more days or have died in a different way. And I believe that not addressing the suffering experience, not even the best palliative care that Stanford University had to offer could alleviate, is more ethical. He was dying on his own terms. And I never imagined my sweetheart would go through this process. None of us ever do. And I beseech you to think in those terms, to really evaluate and think through what we've told. Over time, society has changed. When I first came to the UK in 2017, we didn't have a good sense of where society was. Now we really do. The polls have told us what the jurisdictions think. And if politicians are representing jurisdictions, the laws will change. Doesn't matter your party, your age, your religious affiliation. That was true in my state as well. Things take time. And we also know that it's okay. It's the conservative nature of our profession in medicine is that ultimately we realize that it's time to step aside and let body autonomy, let people make their own decisions with their physicians in the privacy of their room, and the safeguards in place make sense. We put the politician in the political system, we put the safeguards in place, but the decision-making doesn't belong there once society has changed. So I dedicate everything I do now. He asked me to tell a story to my beloved Will Forrest, and thank you for your time.
I know the elementary questions we were asking those years ago, you helped many of us articulate that much better. We were very grateful to you then, and thank you. But for your suffering, for the loss of Will, and your ability to tell his story, he was, of course, so right to be able to, that gift that you gave him, that peaceful death. It's a remarkable thing.
Well, I will, it's the one thing that will happen to everyone in this room. Everyone comes into into being, and everyone leaves. And as I said, it is a remarkable thing to realize that even in our jurisdiction, 66 million Americans have the option to aid in dying, and very few use it. What changes is the conversations. And for those that do need the option, it is the right option. It's not, you know, as a physician, you evaluate and you realize this is right for them. And amongst all the options, one of the arguments that comes up frequently is more palliative care. We need more palliative care. Every jurisdiction where it's passed, when option to aid in dying passes, the use of palliative care and funding for palliative goes up. So that's not a good argument. It just doesn't, the data doesn't hold up. It's a false argument. So, and I'm open to questions for other options.
So thank you, and thank you. So I'm going to chair the next session as Kit's had to leave. So and we'll try and move virtually and in real true life. If colleagues, I can pretty much see everybody, but if colleagues got questions, want to raise their hand and say who they are, I'd be very grateful if we take them in a round of three and then move on. I'll start off with colleague Ronnie Campbell. If you can say where you're from, Ronnie.
I don't know if you remember, but I said there that I said you're a patient who lost the option. What happens then? Is this a system where they can self-administer, change the cocktail of drugs, and then if she physically loses the ability to do that, what then happens?
Oh, you're asking if somebody loses their capacity, what happens? So in the process, once the person has determined capacity, you have to maintain contact to know that they have the continued capacity. We don't prescribe the medication until they're not dispensed the medication until right before they use the medication. So if they lose the capacity, the medication isn't floating out there. There's not lethal medication all over the place. They lose the capacity, the medication is not dispensed.
So who would then administer to them?
No one does, because they don't have capacity. If you don't have capacity, you do not qualify under the law anymore. So lost capacity is no longer an option. You must have the capacity to self-ingest in order to use the option, at least in California, and actually that's true for all of the American jurisdictions, the US jurisdictions. Good question.
You said rightly, very similar to you can actually use take the medication. Have you got, as I understand it, certainly in our system that we're having down, it takes time to go through a process of interviews and so on, and safeguards. Have you got any idea of the numbers of people who go through that process, but then at the end think, well, perhaps I can cope better now, but at least I know I can have it?
That's a great question. So the question is, how many people ask, how many people go through the process, and how many ask? Because we're not required to document the question anymore, but we do know that now that a lot of people know about it, the number of questions have gone up. It's a frequent question, whether or not people are opt-in or whether or not they're conscientious object. And in the US, which has private health insurance, for instance, all of the Catholic systems are opt-out and their physicians are opt-out. However, we do know that in broad questioning that people believe in the option for it. So I don't actually know that. What we do know is that in previous years, 1/3 of the people who went through the process to the point of actually consent, 1/3 of the people would die before the 15 days were over for that initial safeguard in California. And we know that no one changed their mind in that time period of consent. It turns out that people don't change their minds between first signature and second signature. They change their mind between deciding that they wanted the option and using the option. And if you think about it, it makes sense. You write in your consent to have your tooth pulled, the point of that you decide, yes, I'm going to have my tooth pulled is right at the point when they're about to take your tooth out. It's not consent, it's at the point of procedure. So in California, we got rid of that. It's not a safeguard, it's a barrier. So it's now 48 hours between signatures for consent, because that's the consent for the option. And you have right up to the time of ingestion to not use the option. Signing the consent doesn't mean you're going to use it. It just means you understand what it is that you're signing up for. It's a consent, and that's nothing more. It's really helpful. I think I've gotten.
May I make an observation from Jersey?
Yes. I was going to come, and I'll come to you, Philip. Can I? Yes, I was just going to ask you all actually, if you could come back to us on the observation of that experience for your legislators, and also how the different discussions going on in your jurisdictions, how we can help with and expand on, and whether it's helpful sometimes for UK Parliament to comment, because I realise that sometimes there are political issues that make it not helpful. So if I come to you first, was it Philip that was trying to come in there?
Yeah, I think what I said in my opening observations was what happened in Jersey, that the States Assembly, our Parliament in Jersey, their decision in November 2021 was informed by effectively a citizens' jury panel whose government set up. And that meant that there was a ventilation of all of the issues and the detail. Now what's happening is that now the in-principle decision has been made, certain decisions have been made in terms of we're going to be slightly different in Jersey than California, because the actual mechanism of assisted dying will be able to be administered by a qualified physician. All of the detail of these issues are going to be informed by the outcome of the recent public consultation. I can't emphasize enough the importance of the option being there. We don't have any data in Jersey, but what has been the clear public reaction from even people with very strong Christian beliefs that previously would have ruled it out. I'm a Catholic myself, I'm not particularly a worshipper, but I do absolutely respect the Christian viewpoint. But it's been very interesting when you are inevitably faced with end of life, just that option of being able to have that option to end your life at the time of your proving, which is going to happen anyway, to avoid unbearable suffering. That is, I cannot tell members of the UK Parliament in more stronger terms what I saw with my friend Alan. He wanted that option. And as I said earlier, if I could get that time back where all the time he was warring to go to Dignitas, he would have been able to live his life. We think in Jersey that the legislation, which we hope will come in, we're going to pass it in Jersey, hopefully in 2024. We're going to debate the proposals in March 2023.
We just lost that crucial point of timing. Could you repeat that last sentence?
I beg your pardon. Yeah, we expect another. We have a bit different arrangement of the way we do legislation, but effectively we effectively hope that the actual legislation, we've got another parliamentary vote to sort of set the direction of travel on some of the nuances of the way it's going to be brought in. We then expect law drafting, which is already underway, then to come before our Assembly in early 2024. Then at the moment, there is an 18-month implementation period, and then sometime after, but we hope to constrain some of these. And I think that the direction, the message we're getting from the public is to actually get this on, get on and do it as soon as possible.
Thank you. Alex, do you want to come in next on that sort of wider issue of learning from different jurisdictions and what the implications might be?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I'd applaud Philip and what they've done in Jersey, because it's very, very much the Jersey government have taken this on board, used the citizens panel, gathered all the evidence to actually have a groundswell of opinion in favour of assisted dying legislation. And I know that they're also working quite closely with the General Medical Council, which is obviously UK based, which we need to do as well. So there is that link with the United Kingdom to make sure that in terms of regulation for GPs, that's respected. I think Philip's also right, and I'd like to thank Catherine for her statements, that this is all about choice. This is all about body autonomy. And the fact that you have that choice doesn't mean to say that you utilise it, but that can be a really powerful thing when people are faced with their own imminent deaths, and when their families are faced with that. You know, families want to do the best by their loved ones. They do not want them to suffer, whether that's physical suffering and pain or the mental anguish of that loss of dignity at a time of dying. And certainly from an Isle of Man perspective, I've had lots of people come to me from all different backgrounds, from all different religious beliefs, who say they would want that choice. They're not sure whether they would utilise it, but they would want that choice. And again, in terms of that choice and body autonomy, and as Catherine was talking about consent, I think we're quite clear that capacity is paramount to this. Informed consent is paramount to this. Because it is, at the end of the day, a medical procedure and should be viewed as any other medical procedures. Sometimes patients sign consent forms to have radical surgery or radical chemotherapy or radiotherapy, which they know may kill them, but they still go into that with that open knowledge. And I think if we can do that with assisted dying, we give people that raft of choices, and it doesn't deny people the ability to have chemotherapy, to have palliative care, to use the hospice service that is available. It just gives them the ability to, in some ways, take control of their own destiny at a time when they are struggling to do that, because often the medicalisation of the death process that we see in Western societies.
Thank you. Liam.
I'll turn my camera off for precautionary reasons. I think, I mean, I would echo what we've just heard from Alex and Philip in terms of that point about providing almost an insurance policy, allowing individuals to get on and get the most out of the remaining time that they have. I mean, I think Charlotte spoke to that, Catherine spoke to that very, very vividly in her own experience. For the purposes of the proposed legislation, the Scottish Parliament...
Just lost.
Is that any better?
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, the proposed legislation in Scotland, it will be self-administered as well. I know that there are issues, there's issues around mental capacity, which is a non-negotiable, but actually in terms of the physical capacity to self-administer. But I think there are developments in terms of pharmaceuticals, in terms of technologies that broaden out the options there in a way that wasn't maybe the case not so long ago, but it would need to be self-administered. I think in terms of that piece about, I suppose, when it's used, I know in the past, previous bills introduced to the Scottish Parliament set a maximum time limit as well as a minimum time limit of the 14 days that I'm proposing. There was also a maximum limit by which the option of assisted death would need to be pursued. I think on reflection, that is problematic in that it creates a pressure on individuals to act. And this should be about choice. I think all the evidence internationally shows that people do act upon it very shortly after the kind of second declaration. So I don't think it's necessary. And I think the only other thing I would add, Camina, to what has already been said is that not only does this provide a peace of mind, but actually it opens up discussions between individuals and their physicians, whether they're doctors or their consultants, but as importantly opens up the option of, or the possibility of, more honest discussions with family members and friends, so that as difficult as somebody's death may be, there is, I think, far more likelihood that closure is reached. There's an ability to come to terms with it before the individual does pass away, and then in the aftermath. I think one of the most traumatic things from the personal experiences people have been sharing through the consultation to my proposals is the damage that's done to those that are left behind, that they are kind of traumatized and re-traumatized. Their abiding memory of their family member or their friend is one of a bad death rather than the good life leading up to it. And I think the more we're able to facilitate those sorts of conversations, not just for those with an assisted death, but as Alex is pointing out, that situation where you've got double effect, where pain relief may be increased in the certain knowledge that it heightens the risk of accelerating death, but in order to manage the pain, you can have far more honest discussions around those sorts of instances that we're just not allowed to have at the moment, even though that process is legal. So I think those conversations
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to stop you there because we've got 10 minutes. We've got 2 questions, and I want to talk to everybody on the panel afterwards. So if you could say who we are, thank you. And then
Norman Moore, now crossbench here. Could I just get a feel from the speakers
about what has been the attitude of the medical and nursing professional bodies before Parliament decided to act and during parliamentary processes.
Thank you. And finally from Margaret.
Margaret J. It's a simple factual question. I may have misheard, but did the contribution from New Jersey say that in their potential legislation there was going to be the capacity for a doctor to give the medication? Because if so, that does seem to me to be really completely in opposition to any of the other legislation that we've ever considered.
Thank you. So what I'll do is I'll go to the panel online and I'll finish with Catherine, if I may. Benjamin, do you want to take that first? Is he?
It's Philip.
Okay, he's left. Okay, thank you. Sorry, we're not able to communicate terribly.
Forgive me, I didn't hear the first question. I do beg your pardon. Could I just hear it very briefly?
It's about the involvement of medical and nursing professionals,
okay,
the attitude of those.
Absolutely. A colleague from the Isle of Man spoke about the importance of the UK. The Jersey is effectively plugged in. All our physicians are plugged in with the General Medical Council, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and the Health and Care Professionals Council, and the General Pharmaceutical Council. So all of those professional bodies are absolutely engaged. There will, of course, be conscientious objectors. Not everybody will be compelled to do that. And yes, it is the current legislative drafting, the law drafting, that it is going to be the option for. Sorry,
we just, when you said the word current.
Sorry, the current legislative draft is that there will be the ability for self-administration, but also for the end-of-life medication to be administered by a qualified physician, with all the sorts of checks and balances in place.
Okay, we might pick up on that. We want to pick up and comment on that at the end, as a point. Alex.
Yeah, I think, again, in small islands, you have a very finite number of doctors and nurses and other health professionals. I think most of them are fairly conservative. What we're trying to do, though, is have a pragmatic response to what's happening at the moment. I know patients of mine who have taken their own lives, who have suicided, completely alone because of the lack of assisted dying, because they felt so desperate, even with the right palliative care, that they've needed to do that. And as one of the other speakers we were saying, the devastation that causes to the families they leave behind them is absolutely life-changing. We've got to admit that, and as in the UK, the recent ONS survey showed, in terms of those people with chronic disease and cancers, the suicide rate was significantly higher than the general population. That's the reality, and what we're trying to do is have an honest debate. I think it will be difficult to get everyone round in terms of the medical profession towards adopting assisted dying, but we don't have to. With a decent conscientious objection clause, in the same way as we have with reproductive rights and abortion bills, we can allow those people who don't want to take part in assisted dying not to. And those small number of people that we need to provide a 24-hour integrated service to be able to do that. And certainly on the Isle of Man, I imagine that assisted dying will be provided in people's homes rather than hospitals or hospice, that we can do that in a way that they can be there with their families and do that in a holistic way that gives them a decent death, which is, as Liam was saying, is one of the most important things, not just for them, but for the people they leave behind. So there will be opposition from the medical profession. I hate to say, being a member of the medical profession, we're quite conservative at heart, but this is more than just healthcare. This is about body autonomy and choice. And I think it has to be seen as that. And as Catherine was saying, the world moves on. What may be seen as quite threatening and radical now, in 10 years' time, people will be saying, why the hell did it take you so long to get to that point?
Thank you. Liam, medical professions.
Yeah, I think I talked earlier about the shift in the political mood I detect a shift in the mood within the medical profession as well. Significantly, most significantly perhaps, the move by the BMA to a position of neutrality. I think that is highly significant. I think it will be influential in terms of allaying some of the concerns we saw the last time the Scottish Parliament debated legislation of this sort. I think it reflects the fact that medical organisations, like the population at large, represent those with a range of views on this. But I think there's a growing recognition that this is, I think in a Scottish sense, there's almost a recognition that this is a change that is going to happen. And the best way of influencing how that change happens is to take a position of neutrality and then challenge robustly the detail of it and how it would work in practice, the implications for medical professionals, for the members of these organisations. The issue of conscientious objection is perhaps the most obvious, and that, back to your earlier point, Karen, about the interaction between the Scottish Parliament and the UK Parliament, that is obviously falls more within a reserved competence. So there's going to be some interaction there. But those are the sorts of debates about how, not whether. And I think the medical organisations, by and large, have recognised it's not their place to have the debate about whether. It's very much their core business to debate the how and make sure that we get the how right. And I'm certainly very keen. I mean, as I say, the medical advisory group I set up was in part a reflection of the need to get into and understand the potential anxieties that those in the medical profession quite legitimately have, because they will be at the front end of delivering this, and they need to be assured that it can be made to work successfully.
Thank you. Catherine, if we can finish with you on that point and your final reflections.
You know, I have an appreciation for the process, and as Alex mentioned, you know, the medical profession is fairly conservative, and we go from it being illegal to being legal. And that's just not the way it works in medicine. So it's when people say that they think that there'll be a conscientious objector in the medical profession, what we actually found is that mostly people are just uncomfortable and unsure how that will work. How will I train? How will I do this well? And the first, you know, what I found, and you know, we're now in our 6th year, is most of the requests happen at the level of the GP, at the level of family medicine, because that's who knows families. And the request comes, and the physician wants to take care of their own. They want to take care of their patient well. They want to come through and they want to do it right. So that's when we see people go from the abstract of conscientious objection or uncertainty to, I will opt in. I will opt in. And that's when the making it the legal part, where it moves to the forefront for excellence. How do we train physicians to be compassionate, brilliant caregivers at the end of life, including this option becomes so important. We train them not just in aid and dying, but in all the options. And this question of what does the medical profession think? Well, we don't know until we know. We do move very slowly. As I said, I moved slowly, but when I realized that one of the things that I could do was to get my own medical profession to move to a position of neutrality, I wrote the resolution. It went to the California Academy of Family Physicians. It went to the American Academy of Family Physicians. These physicians realized we were not a unified conscientious objector. It turns out that 80% of us were in support of the option. It's a very small minority, just as it is in society, very vocal. And when we stepped aside, you really find out who is going to step in and provide care and who is not, and how do we train one another. And I'll be really interested to see, because I think we're even seeing here in these different jurisdictions that there's a different support, there's different licensure, how it will play out. I'll be really interested to see. But I agree with Alex that in 10 years, we'll look back. I look back and think, why did California wait 20 years to pass our law after Oregon? My patients were traveling as far as yours do to Switzerland. That's how far it is to Oregon from where I live. Why did we do that? And why did I have so many people with failed suicide, suicide? They were just trying to manage their own suffering. So I think that
May I make Two very
Well, sorry, we are going to have to leave, I'm afraid, because we're at 2. So if you can be very, very, very quick.
Two very quick observations, if I may. The opposite side, I stopped Alan trying to commit suicide on more than one occasion. He would have killed himself if I couldn't have got him to Dignitas. The other point about palliative care, we're also going to be improving our palliative care, and that's also brought that onto the agenda to give people real choice about palliative care. Sadly, our hospital was the biggest hospice in Jersey. We're going to be improving our hospice care as well at the same time.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen online, thank you so much. It's been really valuable to have it across. Sometimes technology doesn't help, but it's been really valuable. I think everyone would agree. So thank you for that. Thank you for being here present and sharing the stories. And again, your great leadership in this area. Thank you to the Dignity and Time team for making it happen. And thank you all for coming. But a lot of people coming and going for this afternoon, but a really good hour again as ever. Good luck, colleague, and thank you.
It's an honour to have given evidence.